Well, we are in this series titled UNSHAKABLE, and together we're on a journey together to discover how we all can have unwavering faith as, we're living in, such uncertain time. And in part one of this series, we really circled around with this word uncertainty. And here's the thing we all know. We are living in uncertain times. In fact, I was really just honest and raw with all of you about what happens when uncertainty crashes in my mind and my thoughts go down the really deep, dark rabbit hole. And I said, I'm not saying these thoughts are healthy. I'm not saying these thoughts are productive. I'm not saying that these thoughts are rational. I'm not even saying that these thoughts are faith-filled. But when uncertainty crashes in my mind and I allow my mind to go there, it goes to deep and dark places. And in fact, I shared with all of you my prep now list. I mean, these are items I actually have stored and ready in case the zombie apocalypse happens. I got done sharing this message, and then all of a sudden, this new week crashed in. Greater uncertainty happened. I mean, we all know that. Watch the news at all. Iran starts firing missiles on Israel, and Israel is saying they're going to not just respond, they're going to respond. I found myself watching just video clips of rockets being fired, the Iron Dome, intercepting them. Again, my mind going to really dark, uncertain places as I watch another war start to erupt. And then, here in the United States, the entire East Coast docks closed down. The dock workers on strike. I start hearing people talk about the timeline of what's going to happen within our country because the docks are shut down. And then all of a sudden, my wife texts me and is like, hey, honey, order toilet paper now. And I realized I hadn't put toilet paper on my prep now list. Toilet paper is essential. And so, Tuesday night, I'm sitting at home. I have samsclub.com open up. And we had just ordered toilet paper last week, but I went to order more, right? Because we're going to have a shortage. And I started thinking back to 2020 and no toilet paper, and that was, right? You talking about uncertainty when you can't get toilet paper. So I got it all in my cart. I went to check out to get it ordered. And all of a sudden online, they said, you can't. It's not available. But it says it is. I tried every toilet paper product on samsclub.com. And every time it said it was in stock, but when I went to order it, it said, nope, you can't have toilet paper. You talking about uncertainty, all of those emotions from 4 years ago, not being able to get toilet paper, right? All of that comes rushing back going, oh no. And it's not just about toilet paper. It's about shortages, can't getting just basic life needs. And then my mind starts going, oh no, we're in the fall. I don't know if you think about these things, but again, the rabbit hole in my mind. April of 2020, can't get toilet paper, but spring was in the air. Leaves were coming back on the trees, and all of a sudden I'm like, can't get toilet paper, you got to get leaves. And I'm like, now we're in the fall, and the leaves are falling, so should I start bagging up leaves if I can't get toilet paper? Remember, I'm not saying it's rational. I'm not saying it's healthy. I'm not saying it's faith-filled. I'm just telling you where my mind went to this week. And there's something about uncertainty that drives all of us into that tailspin. And what we're going to see over and over again as we make our way through this series, UNSHAKABLE, through the life of a guy named Daniel, is that in the midst of uncertainty, we can be certain. In fact, our response to uncertainty actually reflects our faith in what is certain. So today, we're going to continue on in this story following this guy named Daniel. He's actually a teenage boy. He's probably 14 or 15 years old. And there's going to be three very specific kind of scenes to this part of his story. Scene one is going to be a power trip. Scene two is going to be a plea and a praise. And well, scene three, all of that leads to a promise. And this promise is what makes, well, certainty flourish in the midst of our uncertainty. So that's where we're going today. So let's step into scene one. Scene one, it's a power trip. And this is how chapter 2 starts in the story of Daniel. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. And we got to pause there because, Nebuchadnezzar was the most powerful person in the known world at that point. Most powerful. He had all the wealth. He had all the armies. He had the land. He had it all. And I think it's interesting that his mind was so troubled. He was so filled with anxiety that his mind wouldn't allow him to sleep. Some 2,600 years ago, a guy who had it all, anxiety, fear, trouble, kept him up all night long. Why? Because he had this dream and he didn't know what to do with it. So, what does the king do? Well, he summons all of his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. And so they came in and they stood before the king. And the conversation went something like this. Now, you could read the whole thing. It's the very beginning part of chapter 2 in the book of Daniel. You could read all of it. But this is basically how the conversation went between the king and these, enchanters, magicians, sorcerers, wise men. Now, I have no idea if these wise men actually wore a hat like you could find in Harry Potter. I have no idea. But in my imagination, they all had a hat like this. So we're going to go with it. But again, here's just a brief synopsis of how this conversation went between the king and them. The king said to them, "Tell me my dream and interpret it." And this is really important. It wasn't just interpret it. The king wanted his wise men to actually tell him what he had dreamt about. Interpreting is one level of difficulty, but to actually walk in and tell the king what he had dreamt about, this is a whole new level. Well, the wise men come back at him and says, "Well, you tell us your dream, then we'll interpret it." We don't know what you dreamt. You were sleeping. It was in your mind. So you tell us your dream, then we'll interpret it. Well, the king just shoots back and goes, "If you don't, you die. If you do, you prosper." Can you feel the power trip? Hey, everything rides on you telling me what I dreamt. You don't do it, I'm just going to kill you. If you do, great wealth is coming your way. Well, these wise men come back at the king and are like, "Hey, king, just tell us your dream, and we will interpret it. We really will." And the king was like, "I've commanded you." Power trip. "You're wasting time. Stop wasting my time." Remember, he had not had a good night's sleep in a while. His mind was troubled, he is cranky, and he's the most powerful person. He's like, "I've commanded you. Tell me what I dreamt and interpret it now." Well, the wise men come back and they're like, "No one, king, can do this. It's impossible. What you're asking of us, it's going to be hard enough to interpret your dream. But to know what your mind thought about while you were sleeping?" And then they made a staggering statement. They said, "Only the gods can, and they're not present." Now, this is a significant insight. You see, God has always been a with us God. You see this from the very beginning in the garden, that God himself was walking with Adam and Eve in the garden. It is such a powerful image that we are created in the imago Dei, the image of God, and that God, from the beginning, when he made man, made woman in his image, that God was present with them in the garden. Throughout the storyline of the Bible, over and over again, we see God who is present and who provides. God who is present and who provides. God is a God who's a with us God, to the point where God the Son comes to this earth as a man to give his life for everyone, because God desires to have a forever relationship with everyone. But that framework is so vastly different than all of these other faith structures. I mean, if you've ever studied just the Greek and the Roman mythology, over and over again, these stories about these Greek gods, these Roman gods and goddesses that just didn't want to be bothered with frail and bothersome mankind. They didn't want to be inconvenienced. They had other stuff to do. And we see this in this storyline, where these wise men were like, a king, only the gods can tell you what you dreamt about, and they're not present. They're kind of busy. They're doing other things. We can't go get them. We can't bother them. They're important. We're not. And the king comes back and says, kill all the wise men. Kill all the wise men. And that brings to a close scene 1, the power trip. Now, not all of this is bad King Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, this is right at the beginning of him taking the throne. In 605 BC, he defeats the emperor Necho of Egypt to solidify Babylon's world power domination. Right after that battle, his dad dies, so Prince Nebuchadnezzar becomes the king. This is the same timeline, period of time where he lays siege to Judah, and it was time of the first exile where Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and some other young Jewish men were taken into Babylonian captivity to be indoctrinated, to be re-educated, to have their names changed. And so Nebuchadnezzar was establishing himself as king. He was making sure everyone knew that he was in charge and what he says goes. And all of this and his power trip leads to, scene number 2, a plead and a praise. And so when Nebuchadnezzar gives his command to kill all the wise men, a guy named Arioch, he was a commander for the king. He sets out to do what the king commanded. And what we're told is when Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. Remember, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were all considered wise men, enchanters, sorcerers. So they were part of that group. And so their lives were on the line. I mean, they weren't there that day, but Arioch was going to kill all of them. Why? Because the king had commanded them. And what we're told is Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. Now, those two insights are really important because we saw this play out in chapter 1, and we're going to see this play out through the storyline of Daniel. You see, wisdom was God-given. In part 1, chapter 1 of this series, we looked at verse 17, where we're told that God gave Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego wisdom and knowledge, and went on to say, and God gave Daniel the ability to interpret dreams. By verse 20, when Nebuchadnezzar meets and interacts with these 4 young Jewish men, he said that they were wiser than anyone else. In fact, 10 times wiser than any other wise man in the entire kingdom. What Daniel knew was his wisdom came from God, that God gave him wisdom. But then we're told, that he spoke with tact. And again, this is something we've already seen play out. the respect that Daniel shows the king and the king's officials, the honor that he shows them, how he talks with them. You see, tact is Daniel's decision. Again, wisdom was God-given, but how Daniel chose to interact with, well, those who have enslaved him, those who have, well, taken him from his homeland and turned his life upside down, those who have spent so much time to re-educate and indoctrinate. I mean, Daniel's a slave of this foreign country. Now, he was eating really good and living really well and had some nice things, but still, he doesn't have the freedom to leave. And in fact, right in this moment, his life was going to end. Why? Because the king had ordered all the wise men to die. So Daniel looks at Arioch, this commander of the king's guard, and he goes, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Man, I get that he's tired, he's not sleeping, but to kill all of us? Why? And so Arioch shares with him what's kind of going on. And at this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time to interpret the dream for him. You're talking about courage. This young teenage boy going, I need to go talk with the king. So he went, he talks with the king, tells the king, hey, I will interpret it. Just give me a little time. Daniel comes back to his house, and we told that he gathered Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He gathered together, and he urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Think about this moment. He pleads with God. He prays. Now, this prayer is vastly different than other types of prayer, but I know I have pleaded with God before, and I'm sure you have. I mean, this is emotional. This is pleading. This is crying. This is begging. This is like, God, we don't want to die. God, we need you now. We need you to speak now. We need you to show up now. Hey, God, we understand that your timing is your timing, but hey, God, the clock is ticking. The king wants all of us dead. So God, please, can you speed it up? And God, oh, by the way, what we're asking from you is massive. I need to tell the king what he dreamt about, and also, oh, by the way, interpret it. God, we need you now. They were pleading with God for their life. And we're told that during the night, the mystery, this dream, was revealed to Daniel in a vision. And what does Daniel do immediately? We're told that he praised the God of heaven. And this is what he said to God. Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Hey, God, you are sovereign. You have always been, and you will always be. Praise be to God. You are everywhere, all-knowing, all-powerful. He goes, wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. This is an image of God's timing is perfect. We might not understand his timing. We might not understand the steps of his plan. We might not understand why he does what he does. But Daniel's like, hey, God, all of it is in your hands. He He deposes kings and raises up others. I mean, Daniel in his lifetime is going to see many different kings that God's going to raise up and remove. And as I read that line, I simply just removed the word kings and I just wrote in the word presidents. And I paused there to say, do you believe that God puts presidents in and removes them? And let me be very specific in that statement. It's easy, no matter which side you kind of sit on, what perspective you have of a current president, a former president, or a future president, to say, yeah, God definitely took that one out, or God definitely put that one in. But when you pull back from your very specific political viewpoint for a moment, do you believe that God is sovereign and that God is leading? Whether we see it or not, whether we understand or not, whether we get why he's doing what he's doing or not, no matter who is in power, who we think should be in power or not, who we want to be. See, ultimately, is God sovereign or not? Is power and wisdom his? And for Daniel, he's serving a pagan, authoritarian king. He says, hey, God, you put kings into power, and you are the one to remove them. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in the darkness, and light dwells within him. God, I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. And what I love about this last part of his praise, his worship song to God, is he shifts into these very personal pronouns, I and me and us and we. It's like, God, thank you. He goes from pleading to God for their lives to saying, God, thank you. We praise you because you are sovereign God. You are over all, you're in all, and you're working through it all. And all of that leads to scene 3, a promise. So what happens? Well, Daniel makes his way into the king. And because he wants to talk to the king, because God has, delivered not only what the dream's about, but how to interpret that dream. And so he comes into the king and he goes, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. Hey, king, remember when your other wise men said, we can't do it, it's impossible, and the gods aren't present? Daniel comes in and says, my God is present, and my God has revealed this mystery, your dream. He's revealed to me. And Daniel looks at the king and says, your majesty, again, think about the wisdom or the respect, the honor he's giving the king. He goes, your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue. I bet Daniel paused for a moment. We don't know this from the text, but I just wonder if he paused for a moment and was like, I really hope I'm going to get this right. Because he knew if he doesn't get this right, all right, he's dead. I mean, the king's already sent out to kill the wise men. I mean, there's a temporary reprieve, but I think Daniel's like, I hope this is right. He's like, king, this is what you dreamt about? He goes, there's this large statue. And then he describes this large statue as enormous, dazzling, awesome in appearance. Now, I want to pause there for a second because I just want to preface this fact that I'm not saying my statue here is awesome and dazzling in appearance. In fact, if you have ever seen a kindergarten kid who has drawn a picture for her mom for Mother's Day, my picture here is slightly worse than that. But I think it's going to start to paint the picture of this dream that Nebuchadnezzar had and what God shared with Daniel, what the dream was and how to interpret it. And so he said, hey, king, there's this large statue. The head was made out of gold. The arms and the chest were made out of silver. The statue's belly and actually thighs, the Bible says, is made out of bronze. The statue's legs were made out of iron. And then its shoes were made out of a mixture of iron and clay. And then Daniel looks at the king and says, and king, this enormous, dazzling, awesome statue was standing there. And then all of a sudden there was a rock, not made by human hands, came out of the sky, crashed into the statue, and it crumbled into the earth. And actually the pieces blew away. And that rock that wasn't made by human hands, that came from the sky, that demolished this statue into rubble, where that rock was, it turned into an enormous mountain, so big that it covered the face of the earth. I think, again, we don't know this in the text, but I think in that moment, Daniel just takes a deep breath and kind of looks at the king. And I think the king was amazed because that was his dream. And then Daniel looks at the king and says, it's time for me to interpret the dream. He goes, O king, majesty, the head of gold represents you, the leader of Babylon. But king, know that everything you have is because of God. Hey, king, know that all of your wealth, all of your power, all the land, everything underneath your control is yours because God of the universe, my God, has given it to you. And then he starts to describe these other parts of the statue that represent kingdoms. Now, I just want to preface this. This is what most scholars think these different kingdoms actually get attached to. But there's different viewpoints as well. But most scholars believe that the silver arms represents the kingdom of the Medo-Persian Empire. Then the bronze kind of belly and thighs represented Greece. The iron legs represented Rome. And then what's interesting is there's some mystery around the shoes, the feet made of iron and clay. But what we do know is it's this amazing image of disunity. Why? Because clay and iron, they don't mix together. I mean, iron's really strong, but when you mix it with clay, it becomes really brittle. It's this image of things coming together that shouldn't come together, powers coming together that shouldn't, and now it's crumbling from within. It's disunity and division and brokenness. And Daniel looks at the king and goes, this is what's to come. But remember, there was a promise that God gave Daniel during the night as God reveals to him this dream and how to interpret it. And Daniel says to the king, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end. I mean, think about the significance of that promise. Daniel goes, hey, king, so you know, another kingdom's coming This kingdom is going to crush all kingdoms, and this kingdom is forever. Hey, king, your time is temporary because all you have has been given to you by God. And God has a plan so much bigger than you and any other king or kingdom or country or leader will ever have. And Daniel says, the great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. And how does Nebuchadnezzar respond? He falls down in front of Daniel. And he goes, surely your God is a God of gods, a Lord of kings, and the revealer of mysteries. For you were able to reveal this mystery to me. You see, I think about this moment of uncertainty for Daniel. In the midst of this uncertainty, Daniel was absolutely certain of who his God was, a God who is present, a God who provides. You see, our response to uncertainty reflects our faith to what's certain. That's why this teenage boy could walk in front of the king. That's why this teenage boy with courage could walk in front of the king. Why? Because he had access to God's wisdom and his power. And you see, when we place our faith and trust in Jesus, what Jesus told us is that we would have access to God himself, God the Spirit, that we would have access to God the Spirit living in us and through us, that his wisdom and his power is ours. And that's why in the midst of uncertainty, we can live with certainty. My challenge for you is this: are you listening more to the news or to God? Are you listening more to what people are saying on social media or to God? Are you spending more time, I'm talking in quality and quantity, to God or to everyone else? Where's your wisdom coming from? Because God is speaking. Are you listening to him? Are you leaning into him? Are you leaning into his power? Because when you lean into God's power, courage starts to form within you and come out of you. Courage that allows Daniel to look at the king and interpret his dream, tell him his dream, to look at the king and say, hey, give me some time, don't kill me yet. Daniel, who said, you know what, I am going to stand for my faith and show you, Nebuchadnezzar, honor and respect. You see, we have access to God's wisdom and his power. Are you leaning into it? In the midst of uncertainty, are you leaning into it? Because we have everything we need. C.S. Lewis, in one of his books, he wrote this thought: God whispers in our pleasure, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It's his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. In some of the seasons of life with the greatest uncertainty, God can accomplish something so significant. My encouragement for you: lean into it. Even in your pain, even in the unknown, even when your mind goes down the rabbit hole, lean into God who is present and will provide. I think about this dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, right? At the very end, this rock that wasn't made by human hands that crashes into the statue, and then all of a sudden, this rock forms into a mountain. And Daniel describes it as a mountain that fills the entire earth. out of that comes this promise that God's kingdom is here now and forevermore. That God, sovereign God, all-knowing God, all-powerful God, God whose plans are perfect, is orchestrating something for now and forevermore. This image of a mountain that reflects God's wisdom and his power. And we just want to take a moment, and wherever you're connecting from, wherever you're watching this, listening to this, and I just want to go back to part of this conversation that Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had with God. I want to read these words. As I read these words, I want to kind of say these, pray these words over you, but I also want you just to be praying through this prayer yourself. He said, praise be to the name of God. The name of God. The one who spoke the stars into place. The one who spoke water into existence. The one who spoke animals, fish, livestock into existence. The one who spoke the mountains into existence. God. Praise be the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. Remember, when you put your faith and trust in Jesus, God himself lives in you and through you. You have access to his wisdom and his power. Are you listening to him? Are you listening to his voice? Are you leaning into his strength? Are you finding courage not because you're courageous, but because you have access to God's presence yourself? He changes times and seasons. Do you trust that God's plan is perfect? Whether you understand his plan or not, whether you get his plan or not, whether you see what comes next in his plan or not, do you trust that the path that God is leading you down is perfect? Do you trust that he is present with you no matter what condition that path looks like, that God is a with us God, that God will provide for us no matter what that might be? Do you trust that he changes times and seasons? Do you trust that God deposes kings, deposes presidents, and raises up others? Do you trust that God, sovereign God, is over the most powerful in the world? Do you trust that God is working, even in ways that maybe it's really difficult to see? Do you trust? He gives wisdom to the wise, and he gives knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in the darkness, and light dwells within him. Light in the midst of darkness. And here's the thing with uncertainty. Uncertainty brings so much darkness. And that's why we have to be certain that God is in and working through all. We have to be certain. Because God will illuminate the darkest of moments to say, I'm with you. I got you. I'm all that you need. Pray with me. Lord, I just ask. This prayer that Daniel spoke some 2,600 years ago is so relevant for us today. Lord, may we trust that you're in all and through all. May we trust that you are leading in ways we see and in ways we can't. May we trust that you are working in ways that we understand and ways we don't understand. Lord, I pray as the uncertainty in our world feels like it's just ramping up ever faster and greater, that, Lord, we'll just lean into your wisdom and power that we have access to because we have your Spirit living and working in us and through us. Lord, may we trust. May we have unwavering faith as we live in uncertain times. In your name we pray. Amen.